Developments now. An outside law firm is looking into 4 different New Orleans police officers. All of them are alleged to have violated department policy by leaking personally identifiable information about that local woman the Mayor Cantrell, accused of stalking her. Now, Mayor Cantrell filed a temporary restraining order against Anne Breaud. Breaud took a picture of this mayor dining with her former security detail officer, Jeffrey Vappie. Cantrell's filing included personal information about Breaud, including her social security number, a picture, and details about her past that would have been only available to law enforcement. So now 4 officers, Officer Vappie, Officer Leslie Guzman, Sergeant Victor Gant, and Officer Ryan St. Martin are all being looked into by the Transcendent Law Group. That's the one that the NOPD brought in as an outside investigator.
I suspect that there are computer records that were accessed, and anyone that accessed those records, there will be a permanent record, and the police department can ascertain that, and the attorneys conducting the investigation can also obtain that information.
That was Raphael Goyeneche. He is the president of the Metropolitan Crime Commission. Now, he says the issue is tied to the fact that Mayor Cantrell filed her allegations against Breaud in civil court outside of her capacity as a mayor. We're going to have much more on this throughout the evening.